Hey everybody, this is Eric Bond, the founder of Beat The GMAT, and welcome to today's exit interview. Today we have a lovely interview planned with Jennifer, who is a Beat The GMAT community member and also someone who has been accepted to UCLA Anderson among some other schools as well, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Jennifer, first, welcome to the Beat The GMAT office and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great. Well, so just for the uninitiated, for those of you who've never seen an exit interview before, this is a series where I sit down with some community members and we talk about their experiences start to finish in applying for and getting admitted to some of the top business schools in the world. And we're very lucky because, Jennifer, this is actually the first time I'm speaking to someone who got accepted to UCLA Anderson. Super selective school, amazing program. And I'm hoping, and I'm sure our community is hoping too, to learn quite a bit from you today.
Great.
So I think all that said, why don't we jump into some of the questions? So my first one, Jennifer, is tell me about yourself. Who are you?
Typical interview question.
Yes,
right?
please.
Well, I am born and raised in the Bay Area, but I went down to LA for college. I went to USC, and then I studied communications there with an emphasis in entertainment and society. So that led into internships and some early jobs in entertainment, celebrity, and fashion PR. And so I dabbled in that for a few years, realized the industry wasn't for me, and so I tried consumer technology PR. So I worked for Sony, Blu-ray, and Pioneer Electronics, and Dell, doing media relations for them and stuff like that. And then eventually I just felt like it was time to try something new, and I ended up getting the job that I have now. I work at Wells Fargo. I do public relations for them.
Gotcha. So strong PR background,
Yep.
a lot of different experiences. Why did you decide that you need an MBA?
I decided that I wanted to change careers after I've been at Wells Fargo for about 4 years now, and I work very closely with our investment strategy team to get them quoted in the newspaper and the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and stuff like that. So the more I worked with them in getting them interviews with those publications, the more I learned about investment management and economics and the strategy behind investing, and it was very fascinating to me. I found myself liking that aspect of the business more than the PR aspect. And on a personal level, I'm very, I follow personal finance a lot. So I'm very committed to my own, saving and investing and making sure I have enough for retirement, even though I'm way too young to think about that. But I don't think I am. I think that is something I worry about every day. So it just felt like a natural transition. It made sense to me. It was something that I could get excited about. And so when I realized that I wanted to change jobs, then I decided it was time to go back and get my MBA.
Gotcha. So did you feel, this is a devil's advocate question because I think I know the answer to this, but did you feel that making that career transition without an MBA was possible as well? Like, did you think about that as well?
I did think about it. I thought about whether or not I should just study for a CFA instead, and then that would give me a lot of good technical background for investment management. But something about the MBA, they give a lot of also leadership education, and they teach you the soft skills about being a manager, which a CFA doesn't give you. So you learn how to work with people, build teams, and lead people, which is not something that's part of a CFA coursework, and I felt like that could benefit me in the long run.
Interesting. So what about other master's programs, like masters in finance, or were those anything that
Never
you considered?
really considered those, no.
Okay. Well, I agree with you in the sense that, like, MBA, it's the most well-rounded degree. It's great. I think it's just a degree custom built for people who are trying to career change.
Yeah.
So, hats off to you for that. So let's talk a little bit now about your some tactical questions around your MBA admission. So you applied to a number of schools we were talking about before this interview even started. How did you go about selecting the schools you wanted to apply to?
I did about a year of research. I did some internet research at the very beginning, and then I started looking on the websites of the schools, seeing which programs seemed to have a good fit for who I was and what I was looking for. And then I started going to info sessions. I took a week off of work and did a whole East Coast trip to go visit schools there.
Oh, okay.
So it's been a long research process.
How important was the school visit when you did that? in making your decision to apply there?
It's, I thought they were important to really get a flavor for the school and the campus and the people there, but it also made it hard. I went with a list of schools that I visited thinking this trip will help me cross some schools off the list, but every school has something great about it that you really enjoy or you really admire, and it makes you want to apply there. So I really didn't cross anything off my list at that point. Yeah,
it's interesting because I don't know if you've seen this within our community, Jennifer, before, but there's sort of this mythology right now that is very, very important to visit. Not just for the personal, understanding what the campus looks like and the students and the classes, but just the belief that you have to go in order to
show your interest,
show that you're interested. Yeah. It's interesting because I really am negative on that position in the sense that I spoke to someone yesterday at another exit interview, and she said she didn't go to any of the campuses. I mean, your research doesn't necessarily have to involve going to these schools to visit, but it is a nice to have, right, if you can do it.
I just think it's hard to get a personal feel for the school based on a brochure or a website, because it's very, it's glossy and they show you what they want to show you. Sure. And then going to campus, you get a feel for, would I want to live in this city? Yeah. Or do the people on this campus seem like people that I would want to be friends with?
Right. One more question about selecting schools. Did rankings matter to you when you were sort of selecting schools?
Yes and no. It's, I wanted to go to a top program where I knew I would get a return on my investment, but at the same time, I wasn't picky about which school in the top that I would want to go to. Okay. If that makes sense. Yeah.
So was it more around programs, or what was it that was really?
It was, in the end, when I whittled down my list, I think it went down from 11 to 5.
Wow. Okay.
It was based on cultural fit. So something that I didn't consider when I was doing these school visits was class size. Yeah. And how closely knit the community was, which was something that was important to me, but I didn't factor in when I was going to these info sessions and asking questions. Right. But then afterwards, when I talked to more people, I realized, do I want to be in a class of 900 and just another face in the crowd, or do I want to be in a smaller 275, 300 person class where you really get to know people well?
That's awesome. Okay, time for me to get on my soapbox for just a moment, so my apologies. To the community that's watching right now, I hope you guys were really taking notes about what Jennifer just said, because she was really focused on the culture of the schools and fit, and seeing herself in that program as a way to select the schools. And too many of you out there I'm not really being critical, but this is a nice sort of criticism. So too many of you guys out there right now, look at the rankings and then sort of make a tear after okay, I'm going to apply to schools 1 through 7 or something. And that's sort of the extent of your research is all about rankings or some sort of perception of brand. But you're really missing out because every school is very different. I mean, there's such nuances in a West Coast program versus an East Coast program, a smaller program versus a larger program. You got to go a couple clicks deeper, like Jennifer did, and figure out culture. So that's going to make you the most happiest and give you the best return on your investment ultimately. I'm back now.
Okay.
So thank you so much. You really got me going there. Specifically, UCLA Anderson. So what's exciting to you about that program?
I like the location a lot. I went to USC for undergrad, so I'm very familiar with the LA area. I love the city. A lot of my friends are still there. And then I like their new curriculum. I thought as a career switcher, it made a lot of sense to give students an opportunity to choose. Do I want to take finance first or marketing first based on what I want to do? Because recruiting seems to start earlier and earlier every year, so you really want to get that heads up. Because I'm a career switcher, I don't have a strong finance background. I wanted to be able to get that information under my belt before I started doing interviews. Yeah. And I love the option that they have for a specific investment management certificate. So
can you describe the UCLA new curriculum a little bit more for those of us who aren't just sort of high level?
For what I know from it, it's so you go in, you choose whether or not you want to follow a finance or marketing track, and then you get to choose, you take that class first in the fall, and that way you have that information at your disposal when you go on recruiting interviews. So I think other programs, the core classes are a little more stringent. The way that they're laid out for you, you have to take it in a specific order.
Yeah, that's pretty common, right? There's like some sort of core track.
And then everyone takes the same classes at the same time, but this offers a little more flexibility so you can focus on what it is you want to do after graduation.
So that's interesting, right? You make a good point, too. So one advantage for UCLA is if you're seeking a wealth management internship, you can sort of front load some of those courses and experiences in your program versus wait to your second year to get those electives and so forth.
Exactly.
It's good to know. Okay. All right, let's talk about the GMAT.
Okay.
My favorite subject, obviously. So, okay, did you self-study or take a course?
Both. I tried to self-study first and realized it was not working for me, and then I took a course after that.
So why wasn't it working for you, the self-study?
It was a lot of the, not tricks, but kind of the way that they have you think about questions in the GMAT courses or even in the course books, the way that they explain questions and how you categorize what type of question is this and how you should go about answering it. It's hard to understand that from a book when you're just reading the directions and you're just reading the text. And it's a lot easier to have an instructor at the front of the room explaining the concepts to you.
Right. I guess that, I completely empathize in the sense that, well, let me ask you, how long ago, when did you take the GMAT?
September 2009.
2009.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you probably were a little bit removed from regular schoolwork at that point.
A little bit. Well, I graduated in 2007, and then I took my prep course. I tried to study during the summer, didn't work. I took my prep course in the winter of 2007. Okay.
Hang on a second. So you took the prep course winter 2007, and you took the test in 2009.
2009.
Why did you have such a big gap between those two?
I think my study habits were not the best after the prep course. I was, I'll study here because I have some free time, or I studied with the TV on, which is, don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
And then I ended up changing jobs. So I moved from LA to San Francisco, which took a chunk of my time.
Okay.
Because I wanted to get just settled back in, get in the groove of my job.
Right.
So it ended up being 2009 until I could really focus.
Gotcha.
And I finally I think the most important thing is to book that test date because it finally kind of kicks you in the butt and makes you study hard.
I hear that all the time, which is, it's sort of like when you're signing up for training for a marathon, right? You need to sign up for it before you start training because that's the only way you're going to stay disciplined towards the goal, right? So you mentioned not studying in front of a TV is a good tip. Any other sort of advice in terms of the best things you did when you were preparing for the GMAT that you thought?
Gosh, my least favorite part was the data sufficiency.
Okay.
So I had to drill myself on that. I did, I made flashcards and I studied on the bus and,
awesome.
I would, I think even when I was going out with people and there was we were waiting for our reservations, I busted out my flashcards.
Wow, hardcore. Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. I like that. Flashcards is a really great tip, right? It's just easy.
I think they have apps now too.
Like on the iPhone and things like that. That's probably true. Beat the GMAT also has its own flashcards. So great. So before I move on to the next questions, I just want to invite people who just may have joined us that we are speaking with Jennifer, who is Beat the GMAT community member, got accepted to UCLA Anderson. And we're talking about her experiences and how she got into this great program. And if you guys have questions, we're going to have a little bit of time, most likely at the end of this session, where we can answer your questions live. To do that, there's a little chat box on the right-hand side of this GoToWebinar platform. You should see it on the bottom right-hand side. And type in your questions. We're going to see them, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can during this session. So, okay, let's move on to... let's move on to the essays.
Okay.
So, you had kind of an interesting story to tell. So you want to make a career change from PR to wealth management.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned to me before that you had experience with doing PR for celebrities, for fashion, for banks, and then now you want to move over to wealth management. How did you make a compelling story out of that career change?
The way that I tied it all together was my personal interest in personal finance. So it's something that, I worried about my family's finances when I was in second grade. I think what most second graders don't think about. Yeah, it's not normal. But I think it's always been a part of who I am, don't spend too much and budget and invest your money, put your money, sign up for your 401k and invest in that. So it made sense to me. And I wrote about that experience and that, how I've been kind of obsessed with this since second grade.
Yeah.
So it made sense in a bigger picture that personal finance has been a part of who I am for a long time.
Yeah.
And it just took working at a bank and working with these investment people to really pull that out of me and realize this is what I could be doing for the next 40 years.
Congratulations on pulling that off, right? Because that's a very, very tough, I feel like for career changers who want to apply, it's always like the toughest thing, right? Is to create that coherent story.
Yeah, like what? Kind of connecting the dots between what you're doing now and what you want to do and why that makes sense.
So did you have any other ways to sort of back up that story? So you mentioned, you had the personal interest that's very deeply rooted in who you are today.
Yep.
Were there other activities you could point to as well? Like, did you serve as a bookkeeper for your family, or like, are you a wealth manager for your family?
Not extracurricular wise, not outside of school or work, but within my job, because I work with our wealth management team, I started learning more about what they do and about, just global economics and investment strategy. So I did my own kind of self-study because I have to read the research reports that they put out. So on the side, I was absorbing some of this information, and I made sure to mention that too.
Cool. All right, so when you're actually writing your essays, tell us how you did it. So what was your process once you're staring at a blank computer screen of actually typing? Did you start with outlines, like writing exercises? Like, how did you actually start to write?
I started with an outline, which is something I normally don't do.
Okay.
As I felt sort of lucky that in my job I write a lot, so I'm a pretty competent writer.
Yeah.
But I started with an outline, kind of made sure I answered all the questions in the prompt, which I think some people forget to do sometimes. But it was outlining my story, making sure it flowed well, making sense.
Yeah.
So I would put the main idea I wanted to cover in every section, and then I would fill in with bullet points to support those main ideas, and then eventually I would just kind of connect them all together until it flowed into an essay.
So I have more questions about that, but I'm going to soapbox again.
Okay.
So Jennifer said something that is so freaking key, which is I made sure that I answered all the questions in the prompt. So sounds obvious, right? Not that easy, and very common mistake where you might answer the question partially, or you
answer questions they don't ask.
Exactly. Listen, like if there's very specific questions that the school's asking, right? But that is so common, just like adding some other sort of responses to questions that you just came up of, in the course of writing. And so just take note of that, please. It's going to save you some time. What was I going to say about the essays? Oh, okay. Who else did you have friends who are reading your essays as well to help you give feedback? Like, how's that?
I didn't. It's weird because my friends I'm the writer of my circle of friends, and so they would come to me with their grad school essays and ask me to read them. And then because I'm kind of known as the editor, the writer of the group, I didn't feel like I had someone to turn to read my own essays. And they were just so personal that I was uncomfortable giving it to a friend to read. I actually prefer to have this, third party who didn't know me as well, a professional person read it. So I did send it to a consultant to look over.
Yeah, okay. So that kind of brings me to another question then. So you didn't have a reader, which, like a real proofreader friend, which is unusual, for sure. Maybe not in your case because you write all the time. But how public was it that you were applying to business school, like when you're in the application process? Did your friends know? Did your family know? Well, your family probably knew.
Friends and family knew, and then my recommenders, who were my direct supervisor and then the supervisor but him.
Okay.
They knew.
Okay. So among your colleagues at work, though, was it very public?
Not very public.
Okay.
The guy who sits behind me at the office, he knows because we talk, but...
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'm always curious because a lot of our community members have different philosophies towards that. Some people are like, I'm a total open book, like I just want to talk to everyone, get feedback around that, Others are sort of like, well, I'm nervous that I don't get anywhere and like I'll look like an idiot or something.
Yeah,
but it's sort of like a fine balance, right?
I vocally voiced my fear that I would not get it anywhere because it was living inside my head, and I just had to get it out there because people knew I was applying, and people would ask questions about, oh, how are your applications going? Because I mean, I was a hermit for all of the fall and winter. I was, I can't hang out. I'm doing my essays. I can't hang out. I'm working on an application.
Okay, so let's talk about that. I'm always interested in this. So how long was that entire process of being a hermit, do you think, when you're applying? Were you applied all around one?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the second half of August till October, the end of October.
Okay, and define hermit. So that means you didn't go out, you didn't like see friends that much, or?
I saw a few close friends every once in a while, but a lot of, if I got invited to something, it would be, sorry, I can't. I'm really focusing on my applications right now.
Gotcha. Okay, I mean, this is such a common theme that I hear, too, is like, people say, either I didn't sleep as much, or I just had to close off some, personal engagements that were happening during that time. So it's a sacrifice, guys.
But worth it.
But worth it, yeah. Okay, let's move on to interviews. So, okay, Anderson gives you a call or email at this point. They're like, hey, Jennifer, we'd love to invite you for an interview. Yeah. So tell us about your interview experience. Did you do it on campus? Who did you talk to as an admissions officer? We'd love to know all the dirty details.
I went to campus. Okay. They say it doesn't matter if you do on campus or off campus, but a couple things factored into my decision. One was that I'm so close to LA, and it's just a quick flight down, that I was afraid it would appear that I was not so interested in UCLA if I didn't go down for the interview. Mm-hmm. And then another thing is that if you go on campus, usually it's a trained second year or an admissions committee member versus an alum if you do off campus. And then I just heard that those interviews they have a wide range of the type of questions you get and how they go, how friendly they are, how, scary they are.
Sure. So when you were actually in the interview, you were talking to a grad student or a second-year student? Or?
I spoke with a second-year student, but there was also an admissions committee member in the room.
In the room, okay.
But she didn't ask me any questions.
So she was just sitting there watching you the whole time? Okay. Was she interacting with you in any manner?
No, just the introductions at the beginning. Okay. We said hi, and then she sat there and she just observed.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, did you feel did you have any curveball questions thrown at you? Was it relaxing?
It was very conversational. My interviewer was super friendly. Yeah. It was a lot of the common interview questions that you'll find on prep sites or, from some of those books you can get online. Yeah. So it was a lot of those common, like, why do you want to come to Anderson? What can you contribute once you're on campus? Yeah. What do you plan to get involved in? Why an MBA, and why now is the big question that I had to think about a little more. Like, why now and why not next year?
Yeah. So a couple of follow-up questions about this too. So no curveballs. What kinds of things you do though in advance to prepare for this interview?
Definitely do your research.
Yeah.
Questions are all over the internet, so you can definitely find out what the common Anderson interview questions are.
Sure.
I pulled all of those I found from the internet and just started bulleting out my ideas for what I would want to say. Okay. I didn't have specific, text that I would memorize and feed back to the interviewer, but I just wanted to put down some ideas to jog my memory about what I wanted to say. I
love that. I mean, the bulleted sort of just points is such a good tactic because, like, I think I get worried when people over-prepare by over-rehearsing the answer because it's just going to sound robotic. I mean, like, oh, I want to go to MBA. So,
I read some admissions director interviews, and that's one of their complaints is that a lot of people come off too rehearsed.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right, this is my thing. I always ask this in interviews this year for some reason, but what were you wearing?
I was wearing a suit, a blazer, and a skirt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, were you prepared for something that was, like, pretty formal?
I went business formal.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It was a formal, kind of regular suit jacket with the matching material and the skirt and a blouse. So something that you would wear to a very formal investment banking sort of interview.
Got it. Did you notice that the other people... Were there people, other
I didn't see other people.
Oh, you didn't?
No. It was, the waiting room is very small, and I was the only person in there at the time.
That is interesting. So, So wait, but that was there like a specific interview day for Anderson where they're inviting people?
Yeah.
And that was that day?
Yeah, you could go online and choose the day you want to interview.
Oh, okay.
But I chose kind of an early morning one. Maybe that was why, but there's nobody else. I know there are a couple other people because they flash your name on the screen.
Okay.
So you know other people are interviewing.
What time was that interview then? Do you remember?
10:30 or 11.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm asking a lot of detailed questions, but people are always interested in this stuff. It's like, what are you wearing? Like, what time was your interview?
Because I feel like people just start thinking every little thing you do factors into whether or not you get accepted.
Yeah, I mean, like, well, here's one insight I learned is just, if I were walking into an Anderson interview today, I would not expect actually to have a silent admissions officer in the corner of the room sort of just like looking at me.
I didn't either.
Yeah, and like, it seems like obviously you handled it well because you got accepted, but, I could see how if people weren't expecting it, maybe that throws them off a little bit.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's part of the reason they're there too, is to see.
Maybe.
Like,
I felt thrown off a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, clearly it worked out for you, so that's great. Okay, so a couple more questions here. You talked about what you want to do after Anderson. Do you think that there's like a single hook, like a dominant factor that got you admitted to school and others?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think I might have stood out a little bit because my background lies more on the non-traditional side.
Yeah.
I don't think a whole lot of PR professionals apply to get their MBA. So I think in that respect, I may have stood out a little bit.
Yeah.
But other than that, I feel like my GMAT and my GPA were solidly in the middle of the averages
right.
that the schools provide.
Gotcha. Okay. What about any like future advice, or I'm sorry, any advice you like to impart to future applicants, just generally? Words of wisdom from someone who's a veteran who's gone through the process.
I would say don't rush the process.
Okay.
It quite honestly took me from 2008 to 2011 to apply.
Wow.
Because I took the prep course, I studied, took my GMAT in 2009, spent 2010 researching schools and visiting, and then in the fall of 2011 I finally applied to school. So it's been a long time coming. Yeah,
it's I'm impressed that you took the GMAT 2 years before, even 3 years?
I really didn't want to have to worry about the GMAT at the same time I was doing essays. It was just, the application process is stressful enough as it is. I didn't want one more thing on top of that.
I think it was a good move. I mean, if you had taken it the same year that you're applying, and God forbid you had to retake it, or maybe even retake it again after that, then you would have been totally, it's really stressful.
Yeah, and then you worry about, will you get your test date in before the application deadline and stuff like that. And I wanted to take it as soon as possible after I graduated from undergrad, when I sort of still had my mind in academic mode.
Yeah, that's good. Well, we can take audience questions in perhaps a few moments, but before we do that, I have a couple bonus questions. Because before we actually started this interview, we were chatting a little bit, and you mentioned that you have a wonderful problem on your hands right now, which is UCLA Anderson is not the only school that you got accepted to, but you're also considering Yale, which is the other school that accepted you, and some others perhaps coming pretty soon. And so, I want to ask a couple Yale questions, just a quick bonus Yale questions. Hope you guys don't mind. So, against versus Anderson, how does sort of Yale match up in your mind? What things are kind of attract you to Yale that maybe Anderson can't even provide?
On a personal level, I've never lived on the East Coast in New England and had that sort of lifestyle. So for me, it would be interesting to live out there for a couple of years. And the Yale class size is slightly smaller than the Anderson class size. I think Anderson is about 375 and Yale is 225. So I think, for me, looking for that tight-knit community, I would lean more towards to SOM because they're just, everyone knows everybody. I think that the financial aid person, I've been told, knows everybody by their first name and stuff like that. So it's just a very familial feeling there. And everyone at Anderson will tell you the same thing. They're so close and everyone there is super nice. But I think just adding a few, 100 plus more people in the class makes it hard to really get to know each other on that deeper level.
Right. And so with regard to Yale too, well, you mentioned that ultimately you'd like to have your career in California.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also a consideration too, right?
That's
you're
a
out of
tough
the region.
one. Yeah, I've talked to several people from Yale, and
Uh-huh.
they've all said the same thing. It's not easy to get a job back in California
Yeah.
if you go to SOM. It's not impossible. You're not unemployable, but
Yeah.
it's tricky. It takes more work. What some people do is they find a company through recruitment. They work in the New York or Boston office for a couple years, and then they transfer to
Right.
a Bay Area office if they can.
Right.
So that's one of the strategies for managing that. But it'll be a lot tougher for me to get a job back in California
Sure.
from Yale.
I mean, tougher being relative in the sense that, I mean, obviously Yale has a very strong brand, and
Yeah.
people have heard of it. So, there's that.
Yeah.
But
the recruiting will be very New York and Boston heavy.
Certainly, particularly in the field that you're interested in, which is
Yeah.
this finance sort of side. Okay, well, thanks for that. So at this point, I think we have a little bit of time to answer a few audience questions.
Sure.
If that's okay with you.
Yep.
So that's your cue, audience. For those of you who are watching us today, Jennifer and I are talking about her experiences getting to UCLA. We talked a little bit about Yale too. And if you have questions, feel free to chat them in on the right-hand side of your screen. We can see them coming in, and we'll do our best to answer them as they come. So let's see. Some questions here. Just a moment, guys. Sorry, I need to read these on the fly. Okay, this is a question from Zvana. I hope I pronounced that name correctly. Hi, Jennifer. My question to you is a two-parter. When you were writing your essays, did you talk about switching careers? Most consultants I've spoken to say that you shouldn't unless you manage to secure an internship in that field. So why don't we actually address that question first?
Okay.
So it sounds like you talked about switching careers in your essays.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it was right up in the first two paragraphs. I talked about my personal interest in finance and my family's personal finances and how that made me realize I wanted to switch careers after working at my company in a communications consultant PR position.
Yeah.
So I did mention that right up front.
Did you ever receive any advice that that's something you shouldn't emphasize?
I didn't receive advice that it's something I shouldn't emphasize, but I did receive advice that because it's going to be obvious in your application that you're a career switcher, because you have to tell them what your career goals are. So it's very obvious, but what they say is to make sure that you can make just a believable transition. You can show, why your connection from what you do now or what's involved in your life right now makes sense to this big career change, whether it's something you do on a personal level that you really want to get off the ground in terms of your career, or if it's something, in your job that made you realize you want to do something else. But it just has to be, there has to be some constant in your personal story. For me, the constant was I've always been obsessed with personal finance.
Yeah.
So for someone else, it might not make sense to say, I worked, taking my story, I worked in celebrity and entertainment PR and fashion, but for some reason I decided I wanted to do investment management.
Right.
It doesn't, you have to have that bridge in the story to make it work.
Very important, yeah. And I've also never heard any advice against talking about career switching either. I mean, I actually think it's one of the best reasons to get an MBA.
So many people career switch.
Totally, right? So, okay, and the second part of this question is, did you talk about career change in your interview? I'm assuming the answer is yes.
Yes.
And was that maybe even the primary theme of your responses?
Sort of. The interviewers were very aware that I was a career switcher.
Okay.
Because they would ask me, what do you want to do with your MBA? And I told them, and then they would ask me, so have you taken any quantitative classes lately?
Right.
So they're very aware that I was planning to do something different. But you just have to make sure that you explain to them fully why this is it's a real transition for you, why this transition makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, well, something you said actually in one of your example responses now triggered a different question I have, which is, PR is not, I guess, a quant-heavy industry.
Not in the least.
In investment management, probably very quant-heavy. Did you have a math background? Like, how did you respond to, your mathness?
Well, I was a business minor in undergrad, so I did take the accounting and finance, which I actually took a liking to it. I'm actually naturally inclined towards those subjects. And then I took econ, statistics, and calculus.
Okay.
After school. So I did it through an extension program.
Oh, okay. So you did it after school.
Yes, yeah. So after my GMAT and kind of during the time when I was researching schools, I was also taking night classes to prepare myself.
That's cool. So let's talk about that a little more. Was it through a community college? Was it?
I did it through UC Berkeley Extension.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's fantastic actually. So you kind of were preparing for. So you had that with business school in mind, I'm assuming?
Yes, yeah. I knew that when I applied and I told them what my career goals were, they were going to look at me and be like, well, do you really have the capacity to do grad school level math, MBA level math? Plus, my quant score on the GMAT was just shy of that 80 percentile that they like to see.
Okay. Well, that's great. I mean, like, I'm glad that we actually revealed this because that's, I think, a really, really strong point for admissions officers when they're reviewing you to see how serious you are about business school, getting prepared for business school, getting prepared for your career after business school, and taking extra classes across the board. Whenever I talk to admissions officers, they say that's we love seeing that.
Yeah.
You know, just taking the effort to do that. So very cool. Okay, well, let's see a couple more audience questions here. So Stoicho is asking a pretty broad question, which is, how did you differentiate yourself from others? You know, did you think a lot about like that question? Is like, what is going to differentiate me, or not?
I kind of took the advice from admissions directors to heart, where they say, don't try, like, be yourself and don't try to be different. Don't try very hard to be different. It just naturally comes across, I think, when you write your essays, your personality should come across in your writing.
Yep.
So I didn't write a very serious literary piece or anything. It had my kind of spunk and personality in it. I added, funny parentheticals to make my point or to add a little joke in there. So it was, just part of my personality that showed through on the paper. And then in the interviews, I just tried to not be very stiff or, I'm obviously very nervous. I think my voice totally quivered while I was doing my first interview, but just, having some sort of naturalness to you so they can envision you as, this is a classmate I want to have. Yeah,
awesome. I mean, soapbox time, guys. So what Jennifer's saying, I mean, if you watch every single exit interview that we've ever done, Jennifer's comments about, I just try to be myself, I want to present myself authentically, is like the top thread that weaves all these exit interviews together.
It sounds cheesy, but it's true.
It totally is. I mean, like, if you try to make yourself into the type that you think that the school is looking for, A, you may actually be completely wrong on what that type is that you think that they really value, but B, it's going to come off as so insincere, right? If you said, you tried to talk about, maybe investment management concepts and like this quant theory and stuff like that, and like, I mean, maybe you can pull it off because you have some natural interest around that, but it's just, you can't just be the person that you think that they want you to be. That's going to completely fail the strategy.
I've been told a lot that they can smell inauthenticity a mile away.
I mean, when you think about, so someone actually once described admissions officers, the stereotype of what they are to me pretty well, which is usually middle-aged, kind of like an English teacher, like your high school English teacher type of person, predominantly female as well. And their number one skill that they've learned in their trade has been, if you want to call it trade, is sniffing out BS. I mean, because like you gotta imagine, like if I were an admissions officer for like a decade, I would frankly be a little bit cynical. Like I'd be like, oh, this person's totally lying, and just like throw the page off the table because I would be so keen into like sniffing out that kind of stuff. It's like this person is in PR, but they said that like they're venture capitalists and like they're talking like a venture capitalist. No.
Yeah.
So think about that. What would you like? You're dealing with a middle-aged high school English teacher person. That they're really good at sniffing out BS. So right to that.
I also feel like you write best about what you know best.
Sure.
And so it comes across more passionate when you know what it is you're writing about versus trying to sound like you know what you're writing about.
Right. So okay, let's see if there's any other questions here. So let's see. Round 2 for UCLA is coming up pretty soon. I'm not even sure if the deadline is passed yet.
I'm not sure for round 2.
Yeah, so the question here is, do you think that there's still time to apply for UCLA? I'll help answer this question,
okay.
Which is, I think, if you want to go for round 3, maybe, but I wouldn't recommend applying round 3. I mean, was that something?
It's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
That's why I specifically prepped myself to apply for round 1, because I just heard, round 2 is when the bulk of people apply, and round 3 is when they're trying to fill in holes in their class, and it's a lot harder round 3. So especially if you're an applicant like me, where your numbers are kind of right in the average, you don't have a jumbo GMAT score, you don't have nearly a 4.0 on your GPA, then you don't really want to risk the round 3.
Right. I mean, so you were pretty strategic in terms of the round you want to apply to. It was definitely round 1 for you.
Yeah.
So my take on this is, I've heard that always apply when you feel like your application is strongest A, right?
Yeah.
And between round 1 and round 2, the differences, in my opinion, is probably very small. I mean, the earlier you apply, it doesn't hurt you.
Right.
Round 3, though, don't do it. I mean, I talked at length about this in another exit interview with a guy from Admin Advantage, which is an admissions consulting firm. The guy's like, okay, I've had a couple of round 3 people who got accepted before, and their profiles were like Olympian or like Afghanistan war hero, really, really off the charts, like crazy accomplished or just crazy weird in a good way people. And for schmoes like me, like, no. So I don't think that round 3 is advisable. In fact, if it's a choice between round 3 and waiting to round 1 for the following year, I say probably that's maybe.
I would wait. I think it gives you extra time to really prepare your application, to think about what your career goals are.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most important questions they ask you, are what are your career goals?
Sure.
Because a lot of the feedback is, from what I've read online, is, for next year, if you reapply, you may want to sharpen that up.
Right.
So you really want to hone in on what you want to do post-MBA.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we have time for just one more question. Actually, it's a question I've had, which is about financial aid. Mm-hmm. How are we going to pay for business school?
God knows. I am debating between doing federal loans or borrowing the parents for my money. Borrowing the money from my parents, because I thought student loan interest rates would be lower given the low interest rate environment that we're in, but I want to say it's 6.8% for one type of loan, and then 7.9% for another. And grad student loans are not deferred for the time you're in school anymore.
Oh, so you have to start paying them immediately.
Yeah. So my parents very generously offered, we'll loan you the money at 6%.
Whoa, that is not that much more generous.
Well, compared to 7 and 8%, maybe it's 4%. I can't. Whatever they were offering was less than what the federal government was offering.
Well, I mean, it's really great that you have that option, right?
Yeah.
But that's in some ways horrifying for me, those rates, because
it's really high.
I have a mortgage right now. I'm paying at 4.65%.
You should get that refied.
Is it really much better right now? What is it right now?
My condo's under 4.
Under 4?
Yeah,
oh, okay. If you guys in the Bay Area, start buying some real estate. These rates are ridiculous. But that is obscene in the sense that, like, that's 2.5, 3 points, 4 points even, like, lower than students.
It will cost you more money to become educated than it costs you to buy a house.
Yeah.
Which is kind of why we're in this housing problem.
But, so it doesn't seem like you have much regrets about taking on the debt, though, right? I mean.
No, my family's belief is that education is good debt.
Yeah.
Some people, I've heard every argument against the MBA and that it's not worth your investment and stuff like that. But I'll listen to you, but in my own head, I still think it's worth it.
Absolutely. I agree with that, too. And also, there's a kind of a neat thing with your personal situation, too, which is if you do successfully transition into investment management, there's a lot of cheddar in that game,
I will hope my goal is to be able to pay off my loans, whether it's to Uncle Sam or to my parents, in 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So it really, I think deciding whether or not to get your MBA really depends on what kind of career you want out of it. Some types of careers you don't need an MBA, and if you go get one, you're just throwing $100,000 down the drain.
Right, right. Well, given your savviness, it sounds like with your personal finance, I'm sure you're going to be able to accomplish that goal of 5 years, maybe even less at this point.
Let's hope so.
Unfortunately, Jennifer, I think that's all the time that we have for today for this session. Sorry to those of you that we couldn't get to your questions, but just on behalf of Beat The GMAT, we're very, very proud of you. Congratulations for getting into Anderson, getting into Yale, and probably some other schools down the pipeline. And just best of luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, and a big thank you to our audience as well for joining us today for this exit interview. And we'll continue this series and talk to you as you guys get into business school. And best of luck to you guys.